first thing we need to do is approve the minutes from our September 17th meeting, which I sent out with the first round of agenda. Does anybody have any changes for those? Sounds like no. So I just need a motion to approve. And when you make a motion, if you could say your name and the library you're from, it'll be helpful for the minutes.
This is Mary Ellen Essig from the Niles Main District Library. I make a motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
Pam Strain McHenry, I second.
Thank you. So up first are CCS updates.
So I have just one update. On the screen, I just wanted to call attention to the fact that CCS is redoing their website. We've had an RFP open since October 26th. It closes this Friday, and then on Monday we'll be opening up the bids for the website redesign. And spending next week taking a look at those, and hopefully by the end of this fiscal year we should have a new website. But at this point we're just opening up our bids, and we'll be taking a look at the offers included.
To Zoom, enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Yeah.
Okay. So, sorry, I've lost my my agenda. Can you scroll up just a little bit, Kathleen, on your screen sharing? I can see.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. So then up next are display of serials. So how we display serials that are cataloged as monographs.
Yeah, and I have a PowerPoint to go with that, so let me go ahead and open that up. Okay, great. So this agenda item was brought to us from Jamie King at Niles, Maine. And what it primarily has to do with are certain serials in our catalog that are currently cataloged as monographs. And I'll show you some examples of those in a moment. But just a little bit of background. Go ahead and bring this up. So the current situation is that in 2018, our catalogers changed the way that we catalog items that contain multiple editions on the same bibliographic entry. Prior to that change, these types of items were cataloged as serials. After the change, they were cataloged as monographs. The reason for this is this allowed patrons to place volume level holds instead of item level holds on these types of titles. And I'll walk you through an example of that in a moment. And then it was recently suggested at CAM that we revert back to serials, and what we're looking for is some PAS feedback. So here are the questions that we want you to think about as we go through this presentation, and then we'll return to them and have time for discussion. So the question is, if we were to revert back to serials, these are the things we want you to think about. So how would this affect the patron experience? How would this change affect the staff experience? And would changing how we catalog these records solve a problem or create more? So we'll take a look at 3 examples of how this would look in PAC and how this would look in LEAP. Okay, so here's an example of an item that technically is a serial, but we catalog it as a book or monograph. So if I were to pull up the Guinness World Records and I'm looking for the newest item, when I pull that item up, even though this is including the record for 2021, in the way that we've got it currently, I see that it's listed as a book for its format, and the year starts at 2000 because that's the first year listed on that record. If we were to change over to serial, the biggest difference we would see is format with the serial, and then we would lose the date that's listed here. You also see that the format icon changes, so we go from a book to what is representative of a serial. Okay. Now, as far as holds are concerned, the way that things are now, we place these volume level holds, or a patron places a volume level hold when they're looking to get an item like, for example, that Guinness World Records 2021. So any item from 2021, because it's at that volume level, could fill that hold. If we were to switch over to serials, we'd be reverting back to holds that are item level, and only that specific item will fill that hold. So for example, I pulled these out of the Niles catalog. If I were placing the hold using the monograph record, were I to select the 2021, that'd be filled by any library's copy of the 2021. With the serial, if I select the 2021, only the Niles copy is going to fill that hold. Okay, so we've got the differences in the holds. And then the third example I want to show you has to do with the way these items display in LEAP. So again, it's that same Guinness World Records. So here, if I look it up and it's cataloged as a monograph, under format, I'll see book, and under publication date, I'll see 2000. On the right, when it's cataloged as a serial, I see that under format it will say serial, but I still see that pub date of 2000. So they're almost identical, but we see the difference in formats. We've got book and we've got serial. So then my questions to you become, if we were to take a look at these different experiences, how will having things cataloged as a serial versus a monograph change things up for our patrons that look at the catalog, change things up for the staff that have to fill and place some of those holds? And are we creating a problem by taking a look at items cataloged as serials versus monographs, or are we solving something? So go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to contribute. We'll also be monitoring the chat if you would prefer to type your response. So I'll go ahead and open that up for discussion.
I have a question, Kathleen. Did we know, were there issues when we changed it in 2018?
We changed from the serial to the monograph. So I believe the biggest reason for that decision was that we didn't want item level holds to exist if possible. So if something could be filled by multiple items, there wasn't necessarily a need for it to be only filled by a singular item, because as we all know, like sometimes things get lost, or if we were to place an item level hold, it can cause problems for the patron trying to get the item.
Right. Because I'm thinking, you know, the fewer changes we put the patrons through, the better off we are. And I actually haven't had any complaints from my desk staff about it. Okay. So I think they just, either they're not telling me, which could be the case, or they're just dealing with it. And I haven't seen, when I saw that, I went through our gimlets and didn't see anything in the last 6 months or so from any gimlet issues, you know, that were noted either. So I don't know. I would prefer to change things as little as possible at this point.
Okay. And again, just keep in mind, Cam is looking for feedback. We don't have to make a decision today. I did get 3 chats, so let me go ahead and read those. So Rachel at CCS says, it is not a recommendation that CAM has voted on yet. So as mentioned earlier, it's not something they voted on. We just want some feedback. Anne from Huntley says, is there a specific reason why CAM recommends changing back to serials? I believe the biggest reason was that these are technically serials. So from like a technical standpoint, they should be cataloged as serials. We're cataloging them as monographs. And we do that to like basically trick the holding system so we can place the non-item level, so that we're placing that bib level hold that can be filled by volumes from multiple libraries. But it's a kind of a technicality. That's the reason we looked at changing it, is because like technically it would be correct. Okay. First comment I see from Nancy, it says, I don't remember that it would only place a hold on the particular item in PowerPack. If we look at graphic novels and the mini volumes, it places a hold on the specific volume, not the specific item. So the biggest difference for that is there are some things that, this is a narrow group of serials that we're talking about. Graphic novels are cataloged differently in such a way that if you're looking for volume 1, that volume 1 should be fillable by any volume within that graphic novel series at a library that owns it. So we're looking at like a narrower group of serials, and graphic novels are not included in that.
We haven't had any patron questions or complaints either. My only thought is if a patron is using a facet to sort results, they're not going to think about a book versus a serial, but I think that's probably a very small issue to worry about.
That's still worth like thinking through. That's why we're discussing it. So it's very valid. Okay.
The reason why this happens with serials is that when a cataloging record is coded for a serial, it's supposed to work in conjunction with the serial holdings record. And so in PAC, if there is no serial holdings record for the serial, and then subsequently does not have the issue designation where it would be if it had a serial holdings record, PAC automatically looks at the volume as being a separate volume from like all the other possible items, and then only allows it to put the item record hold on a specific item.
I remember back when this decision was first made, and Cam brought it to, or whatever group brought it to the PAS group, and we said, no, don't change it from serials to book level. And they said, sorry, we're not going to agree with you, and we're going to do it anyway. Partially because, I mean, I was working on the pick list yesterday, and I had somebody that placed a hold on a travel item, and I'm sure what they really wanted was the most recent, but because the 2019 came up in the Power Pack sooner than the 2020 for whatever reason, however they were sorting, they placed a hold on the 2019 rather than on the 2020, where if they were all in the same record, it makes it easier for staff to see, okay, look, I've got the 2019 and the 2020 on the shelf. Oh, look, I still have the 2016, and that should go because it's old. It's easier, I think, for staff, and I remember that this group was very upset that they changed it to what they did change it to. And I think we've all just gotten used to dealing with it, but I think for the sake of what's really supposed to be, it should be a serial record because that's what they are. And I know with magazines, which are serials as well, if somebody places a hold on the September issue of prevention, it's not only looking for my copy of the prevention September 2020 issue, it's looking at the consortium, provided we were actually sharing right now, but we're not. But in reality, it's not looking for that item specific, it is looking for that specific volume wherever it is available.
Rachel, maybe you can speak to this. I don't think travel books, I think we're even looking at a narrower subset than the travel books, that the travel books aren't included in this group of serials that Cam was speaking to.
The older records are, so the travel books, law books, test prep books, and so forth, those, it was decided, I think in like 2018, that those would be put on individual records for each edition, but not to be changed retroactively for the previous editions. So the previous editions are still on those serial holdings records. And when we do decide to do a bulk change, if we decide to do it, the older records would be included.
Okay. Okay. Did we have any other feedback on this as far as like patron experience or staff experience? Okay, I don't see any more verbal, so I'm just going to read some of the comments that have come through. Okay, Jason, thanks, Rachel, for your clarification. I appreciate that. Melissa Morgan from Winnetka Northfield says, in general, I prefer volume/bib level holds over item level holds. And that is all. Okay, well, that's fine. So we'll go ahead and record all of the feedback that we've received here and pass that on to camp so they can use that in their decision making. All right. I'm going to back out of here. And then Becky, did you want to introduce the next agenda item?
Sorry, I forgot I was on mute.
That's okay.
So our next topic is custom pre-expiration notices. We've had 2 libraries ask CCS about customizing notices to include a link for renewing library cards online.
Great. Okay. So this was one. Do we have a representative from Huntley that was going to talk about this? Okay. If not, I have a
Hi.
short. Oh, okay.
Hi, yeah, I'm Rosie from Huntley. What do you want me? You want me to explain what we want, or?
So what I had a short presentation I was just going to give about like the ticket and what it would look like, and then I was just wondering if you could just chat about like how you hope to use that at Huntley, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, great. So I'll just give a short presentation, and then if there's anything you want to add or clarify or talk about how that would work in your Huntley workflow, or people might have questions about how you came up with the idea, then there'll be time for that. Okay, so I think this is something I'm actually really excited about. I love when things that are tickets turn into suggestions that can help make things better for our patrons. Okay. All right, so sounds really nitty-gritty. Custom pre-expiration notices sounds like a very dry topic, but I promise it's not. So what we're getting at here is, as we've kind of come into these COVID times, things like our hold notices have become really customized as far as where patrons can pick up, if they can go online and make an appointment. We found the need for like that customization. But not in the current situation, not all notices are customized, the exception being those full pickup notices I just mentioned. What a pre-expiration notice is, it's a notice that's sent a certain number of days before a library card expires. The way that we've been solving the situation currently is to extend expiration dates for libraries. You can always just put in a ticket to have that done. But there is also this idea that patrons might be able to renew online by submitting certain documentation. But in our current situation, the way that these pre-expiration notices look is if you were to get an email, it simply says your library card will expire soon, and then the body of that email says your library card will expire in 31 days. Please visit the library with proof of residency to renew your account. Now, we all know, given the library you work at, that may or may not be possible in this time. And then a text is a little bit shorter. It's the same message as you'd see in that email. Now, the current solution to this problem is you put in a ticket with our help desk to extend your expiration and address check dates, and then patrons never receive that message because their cards never are in danger of expiring. Kind of a fun fact, there are actually 6 CCS libraries that don't have library card expiration dates, so they've solved that problem by just not having expiration dates in the first place. But this proposed solution from Huntley, which is kind of an exciting one, is the idea of placing a URL and instructions in the pre-expiration notice where patrons might submit residency documentation. So for example, instead of getting that notice that just says, hey, come visit us, there's the potential to put in a URL there that patrons can click on and then submit documentation that like, or here's a copy of my license or property tax bill or whatever your library uses in that renewal workflow. Okay, some of the limitations though, just to be aware of. If we include a URL in a notice, it must be fully spelled out. So if you were planning on using something like a bit.ly link or a URL shortener, you can't. You have to use that full URL. So for example, if it was www.huntleylibrary.com/renew-your-card, that whole thing gets spelled out, but then patrons can click on it and be prompted to the right place. Or if you wanted to even include something such as email X person, like with said documentation and renew virtually, this just sort of opens up some of the workflows and workarounds for renewing cards. Okay, so my question to you then becomes, are there any reasons we should not allow customization of these pre-expiration notices? Just keep in mind it's discussion. Ultimately, the Circin ILO group that meets tomorrow will vote whether to allow the inclusion of these URLs in the pre-expiration notices. I just really would like to value your feedback, but just keep in mind ultimately Circin ILO will be the ones to vote on it, but I think the more groups that we can hear from, the better. So Rosie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
So the patron would, so these notices, the patron would link on this link to a form and then answer their information and be directed to upload different proof of ID, then we would have that form go back to the circulation email, and staff would check the details and confirm and do the renewal of the card if it's appropriate, and then obviously staff would delete all the photos of the proof of ID for security reasons.
Okay, so I see 3 comments so far. They all seem pretty positive. Lisa says, from Wilmette would say, the flexibility seems like it would be helpful. Tara from Lake Villa says, I think it's a great idea. And Christina from Des Plaines says, I agree, great idea. And Liz from Glencoe says, would it be a temporary date and patron? Would it be temporary date and the patron would have to submit documentation? I like the idea. I think that would differ from library to library because it's like your internal workflow. Jillian says, I like this as well. And Kim from Glenview says, good idea, and individual libraries can opt in if they like, or if they would like to. Yeah, so I think that's really positive feedback too, is that it's just another solution. It's like another tool in your toolbox. It doesn't mean you have to change the way you're doing things, because there's a lot of ways to solve this problem. Was there any other feedback on this before we went ahead and moved on to the next agenda item? Catherine from Highland Park says, would it be customizable beyond URL? We are renewing by phone. So yeah, because we're offering the customization, if you wanted to prompt patrons to call, you certainly could do that. But you could also renew the way a lot of folks have, just extending those renewal dates. But you know, if you're doing it by phone, then that's fine too. I think whatever workflows you're using internally would be what you would pass on in the notice. Lori from Park Ridge says, I like it too. The long link in a text message does get broken, so keep that in mind for text message notification patrons. Yeah, so Lori does bring up a good point. There are a certain number of characters allowed in a text, and then they cut. So I believe it's, I want to say it's like 140 or 160 characters. So you would want to, CCS would work with you on that when you were to configure a notice. But essentially, you'd want to make sure you front load that link, like visit here to renew, and then you could include a little bit more information after that. That way that link doesn't cut. But I promise we're thinking about that when we work with you, but it is an important thing to note. Okay. Okay, so I'm just hearing sniffing and crickets, so I think we're good to move on to the next topic. Let me close out of this PowerPoint. Okay, great. And then Becky, whenever you're ready. Okay, we'll just move on to the next one. Okay, so the next thing we had for discussion was cataloging of on-order records. When I received this topic, it was submitted yesterday. I was a little confused because we already catalog on-order records a certain way, but I clarified with the person who submitted it that they were talking about cataloging of forthcoming records. Because forthcoming records is something we had surveyed about prior to the last PAS meeting, and it's potentially a new thing that we haven't done before. So Deborah was going to talk a little bit more about forthcoming records and how that will affect the catalog as well as where we're at with that right now. Sure. So I'll jump in here. First of all, thank you to everyone who responded to the survey we sent out to the PAS listserv on forthcoming title records. So let me just give a really brief overview for that topic. When Palatine joined CCS as a standalone, they had previously cataloged titles that hadn't yet been released or made available for purchase from a vendor. So an example of a forthcoming title could be a streaming television show that is only on Hulu and hasn't been made available for purchase, for example, on DVD or Blu-ray. But they were receiving patron requests for those titles, so rather than keep track by paper, Palatine's practice was to actually create a forthcoming bibliographic record in the database so that staff and patrons could place holds on these titles while the library was waiting for the DVD or the Blu-ray to be made available for pre-order from Amazon or Midwest Tape or what have you. So we are bringing this discussion topic to various committees for discussion to see how would this practice change the patron experience, the staff experience, and just impact the CCS community as a whole. So where are we at in this discussion? We have brought this to scrap for discussion amongst our catalogers. We've sent a survey to the PAS and acquisitions groups to gather just some feedback and thoughts from staff to see how they feel it would impact both their workflow and the patron experience. So I'm actually going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second. I compiled the results from that survey, so I'm going to just go over them really briefly with you here. Okay, can you see my screen, Kathleen? Can you give me like a little thumbs up? Okay, perfect. Thank you for all the thumbs up there. So I'm going to pop this link into the chat as well so that in case my screen is not big enough, you guys can take a look yourself. So I chatted a link to this Google Data Studio dashboard so you guys can take a peek at the survey results from both acquisitions and PAS. So we received 42 responses from 25 of our libraries. And again, we sent this out to public services staff as well as acquisitions and technical services staff. So in the survey, we asked, you know, do you support libraries allowing forthcoming title records to be created in the database? So in response to that question, 45% said that they did not support CCS allowing forthcoming title records to be created, but there were a number of libraries and individuals who did support CCS considering this new cataloging practice. We also have some follow-up questions when it comes to holds, because a major concern that came up in our discussions was how would this impact patrons when it comes to placing holds. So we did ask a number of questions on, you know, what would libraries prefer? Would you prefer patrons from participating libraries being allowed to create holds only, opening up holds to everyone, and so on? So feel free to hop around and review the survey results and let me know if you have any questions about them. But next steps for this was brought to database management for discussion in November. We had a robust discussion of how this would impact the consortia, but we decided we needed a little bit more information and time before we came to a vote. So database management will actually meet on Monday to continue our discussion of forthcoming title records, and then we will have a final vote on Monday whether we'll allow libraries to optionally participate in creation of these new records. So I feel like this is kind of a non-update in that we're talking about it still, but we don't actually have a vote or a decision yet to share with the group. But I'm interested in hearing any feedback from this group or fielding any questions you might have about the topic.
Northbrook talked about this as a group. We have like an ILS group, and pretty strongly felt like we did not want to do this because it would be difficult from the patron perspective to know the difference between an item that's on order because we know that the item is in a warehouse and it's being shipped, as opposed to something that might be released to DVD at some point, but we can't really say for sure when the physical item will be arriving. So that was an issue. Also, potentially giving out misinformation at the service point, because we're looking and saying like, oh yeah, I can place a hold for you on that. But really, we don't know when that item's going to be available and how long the patron would have to wait. And then the other thing we were concerned about, which you touched on, Deborah, is how the holds get canceled and how we would work with patrons on that if they were upset that they put a hold on something and it was canceled because it never actually became available to libraries to check out. So we felt like it would possibly cause some customer service issues. And then the other question I just had based on what you just said is, if we opt out, how do we keep our patrons from placing holds on items from libraries that opt in?
Yeah, I think the holds question is probably the trickiest part of this whole topic, because if we allow libraries to opt into this practice, so we say, we're going to let libraries add these kinds of records to the database. It's optional. Not everyone has to participate. If you'd like to participate, add an item to the record, and most likely make it holdable only to your patrons. So there are settings on the item record that say this item is holdable to only my patrons, or this item is holdable to everyone. So I assume one of the requirements, if we decide to move forward with this, and again, that vote will happen Monday, one of the requirements likely would be the item has to be limited to your patrons only if you're participating. That way we minimize the number of holds placed consortia-wide, and then the number of holds that would have to be canceled and patrons contacted if the item never ends up being published or released. Now, we did get some questions at database management saying, you know, can we prevent my patrons from even seeing this in the catalog? And the answer to that is no. Most libraries, and we have actively encouraged libraries to open up their catalog to search holdings across all CCS libraries. So patrons can search all CCS libraries, and even if a library doesn't participate, your patrons could find the record, try to place a hold. And ultimately, what would happen if your library didn't participate is that they'd be blocked from placing a hold, and they would get an error message. So there is, even for libraries that wouldn't participate, there is or was some concern at database management that that's not a great customer experience for the libraries who don't participate, because again, your patron sees that record for the marvelous nasal, is that what it's called? And they see it, but they can't place a hold because you're not participating. But they see that it's there, so they're like, why don't you buy this? Why don't you have a copy? So that is kind of a tricky piece, I think, to the topic. I see a comment from Lisa at Wilmette saying, I understand from a patron point of view, but I'm leery from a librarian standpoint. So what if the titles never become available, or if it's a long time? It could be months or years. So I think, and I see Violet here as well, I think Palatine's current practice is to cancel those holds and delete the item if the title does not become available within 18 months. So if we're to move forward with this, we need to come up with a similar standard that said after X amount of time, if the title is never released, we'll need to remove that record from the database. And then cancel the holds and contact the patrons as needed.
I wonder if there's like a satisfaction kind of scale that we need to consider, that what we're potentially doing is lining up one set of patrons for being dissatisfied and then satisfying the need of a small group. And I understand that it's probably tricky for Palatine to say, here's a new catalog and now you've lost some of the functionality that we had before. But there's probably a lot of new things that those patrons are encountering, plus the whole world is encountering new different things. It might just be that this is a great time to make that break, and so not to introduce a level of dissatisfaction to the larger group who's come out and said, right out of the chute, this does not look like something we're interested in. I don't know if there's like a scale, like we're gonna introduce potential dissatisfaction to 80% of our people, but we will serve 8% of our people. Where does that ratio become something that the 80% will go with, so that the 8% will be satisfied? You know, like is there some like larger agreement among all of us?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly, you know, what consortia decision making looks like, is what is the best decision for the whole, rather than, again, a smaller percentage of the group. So one thing that we talked about at database management was, you know, are we making assumptions about how our patrons are placing holds, and how do our patrons place holds? When do they place holds? How many patrons want to put a hold a year ahead of a title being released, and how many want to place holds when it comes out and they don't want to do it too far in advance? So I'm actually working with Bob to gather some data on our patron hold placing practices, and I can actually give a little bit of a sneak peek to this group because I do think it's really interesting. Not done gathering all of the data yet, but let me just show you really quick. A graph essentially that shows when our patrons are placing holds. So we looked at a subset of bibliographic records that were created September 1st, 2019 through December 31st, 2019. And from that set of bib records, we looked, when are patrons placing holds on these records? Are they placing them in advance of the title actually being released? Are they placing it after the title's actually released? And so you can see here, I don't know, I hope this isn't too small, but right here is where we have the title's release date, so the actual publication date. So you can see that actually most patrons are placing holds after the title becomes available for circulation. And we do have a fair amount of patrons who are placing holds prior to the item being released, but the majority or bulk of patron holds are being placed after the title begins circulating. So I thought that was really interesting to look at. Again, you see sort of this peak within the first 2 weeks of a title circulating or beginning to be circulated to the patrons. But we're still working to gather some of this data, so this is just a little bit of a sneak peek for you to take a look. But I thought that was interesting to note that I assume always patrons are like placing these holds really far in advance. But when you look at sort of the overall picture, it does seem like most patrons are placing them in the 2 weeks after a title begins circulating.
I have a question. This is Mary Ellen from the Niles, Maine District Library. How would the old holds list then be handled? Would there be limitation imposed on that, or? Yeah,
and I know that's a really well-loved report and web reports that libraries use to manage their holds. We would likely need to make some adjustments if we're to move forward with this, because we'll be essentially allowing holds to be created much earlier in the process. We'll need to make some adjustments and either maybe pull those holds on forthcoming records out of that report and then create a separate report for libraries who are participating to track their patron holds. And one additional concern that we need to look at if, again, we move forward with this, right now holds expire after 1 year. So if we're allowing these records to be created farther and farther in advance, we'd need to relook at that threshold to ensure that these holds aren't continually expiring and staff have to do a lot of manual work to extend them. I do see just some comments in the chat chiming in that, Ariane, we agree with what you said. Tara from Lake Villa says that definitely understand Palatine's point of view, but we do have a lot of patrons who ask for things that aren't available, that are still streaming, and they're not quite sure why the items aren't available even when we explain. Then they curse the streaming services, which I'm sure is very true. Let's see what else. A lot of agreement here again.
You're the voice of the group, Ariane. And then Violet from Palatine does chime in to say that they have a time limit, and if it never comes out, they'll cancel the hold, and that they completely understand that this could be a customer service issue for the consortia, that they've had a big outcry from their patrons who are used to the service, and of course they want to be a great partner for CCS, so they're willing to follow whatever the group decides. Thank you, Violet. Any other comments, feedback? We have a couple database management members here, so hopefully we'll all take in this information and bring it to our discussion on Monday. We have a comment from Anne from Huntley saying, could there be an option to have a specific amount of time ahead of a publication date which items could be cataloged and holds allowed? For example, records can be created and hold placed on the items 3 months or 6 months ahead of the pub date. I think this could get tricky when we don't know the pub date, especially for some of the streaming titles. You just don't quite know when these things will be released in a physical format. I think setting guidelines for things when we know the publication date, such as we know this James Patterson book is going to be coming out in the summer of 2021 or 2022, like that would be easier to set kind of criteria. But for streaming things, I think it is difficult to know when the physical format will be released if it hasn't been announced yet. There's a comment from Catherine at Highland Park saying that it does seem to be pushing down its purpose to try to manage items that don't actually exist. So that is correct. This would allow it. This would essentially be allowing libraries to add records for things that aren't in existence yet, and that we don't know would be in existence at some point in time. So that's a good comment. Any other comments to share? If you think of something after the meeting, feel free to send me a quick email, you know, and I can bring your points to database management on Monday when we talk. So we'll hopefully have an update for all of you soon on this topic. And again, thank you so much to everyone who participated in that survey. That data and your feedback was really helpful for the group.
Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and have Becky introduce the next topic. And again, if you have any more feedback, you can always throw that into the chat or email Deborah as well. So Becky, whenever you're ready, I'll mute myself.
Sure. So our next topic is reading levels in our catalog records, and the question is whether or not libraries are finding that more students are coming in looking for those just right books. You know, what do you have at this level or that level, especially now that they don't have access to their school libraries. I know obviously we always get questions like that, but are we finding that we're getting more questions like that, and are we getting hung up on this question's from my library, that's why I can elaborate so much, whether or not we are able to find the information that we need. Like, do enough records have the reading level in them? Is it something we could add more to? Is it just us?
I have a question. When you talk about reading levels, are you talking about the publisher reading level, like an I can read 1, 2, or 3, or are you talking about like a Fountas and Pinnell level?
So for us, for our elementary schools, it's particularly Fountas and Pinnell, and we're finding that a lot of the records do have AR or Lexile. Fewer have Fountas and Pinnell, so we were just thinking, how hard would it be if all 3 of those big 3 were on more of our records, the majority of our records, if it started to be a standard practice when we get new ones that they're just on them? Is it something that a lot of people would be happy with?
Isn't the problem, though, that Fountas and Pinnell is a proprietary like reading level, and so it's almost like a subscription service? So while publishers will usually provide the Lexile or the AR, they don't usually provide Fountas and Pinnell.
Right, yeah, Fountas and Pinnell, you do have to subscribe to their service to be able to access that information. Otherwise, or you can buy those really old reference books that I think they haven't updated in a really long time. So that's our struggle too, is that our school district uses Fountas and Pinnell, but there isn't necessarily an easy way to access it. We have a subscription so we can check, but.
Yeah, no, it would be great if it was in the catalog, because there is limitations, just so people are aware. to the search. Sometimes you can find it by searching like guided reading level :H, and some come up, but it doesn't work at all for K because of kindergarten. So there's really limitations, but I wasn't even sure this was available to add to records.
Right, and neither were we. That's why we're asking, because it would be really great, because even just that search that you described, that's really hard to explain to a parent who's trying to do it from home, who just wants to find books for their second grader to read, and they can't get into the school library where there's maybe the stickers on everything.
Right.
I do have some comments coming in. I'll just share those as well. Liz from Glencoe shares, I checked with the children's department and there's no increase here in requests for specific Lexile or accelerated reader items. Kelly at Northbrook says, don't the reading levels come with the OCLC records? And Anne from Huntley says, to my knowledge, we have not had an increase in these kinds of requests. There are charts available that give comparisons of Lexile level to accelerated reader to Fontes and Pinnell. And then Melissa Morgan at Winnetka Northfield says, we started creating record sets, RE Fontes and Pinnell, of Fontes and Pinnell.
Okay, I mean, and maybe that is just the answer. Is just, we've started creating record sets too, and we do have the chart to review, to refer to. We're mostly just finding that our patrons get frustrated when they want to just be able to click L and then get all the books at an L. But maybe it's just not possible.
I did.
So this is fuzzy memory for me. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember when CCS was BiblioCommons, and there was a big change in that Lexile, Fontes and Pinnell, and AR levels were coming with the bib records. And I feel like that was not coming from CCS, it was coming from the OCLC record, and that cataloging wasn't happening within the consortium. It was coming as a broader, from a broader place. So I think if we wanted to do something like this on the consortial level, we would have to have catalogers dedicated to making sure that those records were in place, and you know, that would be difficult. But and then the other thing I was going to say, kind of switching topics, is the with the Fontes and Pinnell, you do kind of have to have a subscription to be able to look up which levels things are. So that would be something like consortium-wide, we would have to have that in place so that whoever's cataloging could look up and put in the correct level.
So I think one thing to keep in mind is that, I think we spent at Niles, you know, some time and energy to customize or to build some Lexile. I think this is just Niles, right? Some Lexiles facets. I don't know. Was that something?
Everyone has them.
What, Kathleen?
Oh, sorry. Everybody has the Lexile level facet. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the reasons I think that time and energy was well spent was that when kids in Illinois get their standardized reading tests, that number gets assigned to them, right? Like somebody's brother-in-law or sister-in-law works for Lexile. Or so that number is something that parents come to you with on a piece of paper issued from the school, like at the state level. Whereas Fontes and Pinnell isn't necessarily, I mean, it's like one way of teaching reading. And this is going to be like a long-term effect, but their guided reading is now kind of it's got its first stab. So there was a way of teaching reading that's been going on for like 20 years. And Fontes and Pinnell is a product of that style of teaching kids how to read. And that is now starting to implode. Now the outcome of that in these first kind of implosions aren't going to be felt at the state level for probably about 15 years, right? But Fontes and Pinnell might be going away in 10 or 15 years. So is it pedagogically sound? That's an argument. There's lots of things that we could talk about, but parents do come looking with Lexile numbers because the state tells them that that's what their kid is leveled at. Fontes and Pinnell is not necessarily something that's used at the state level. It's used at the local level.
There are comments as well. Oh, no. I'll read comments in a moment. Please, whoever was speaking, continue to do so.
Oh. Sorry. I was just going to comment on what she said. It's true that they get the written report with the Lexile level, but the minute that there is conferences with the students, we will get an influx of Fontes and Pinnell. So it's like, it basically happens every semester for like 2 or 3 days that the people come in, want those books, and then it kind of dies down. So I think there's a want, but I think a lot of times once you explain to parents what that is and why we do books other ways and kind of show them that they can get the same similar books, usually people are satisfied, I guess is the best way to say it.
Okay, so I'm just going to make it through the comments here just so those who chatted or like heard as well. So let's see. So Anne from Huntley shared the chart that I threw up on the screen. It looks like it's like a Fontes and Pinnell to grade level, to Lexile level conversion chart. Lisa from Wilmette says, Melissa, that sounds creative and effective in regards to creating the record sets for the different types of Fontes and Pinnell reading levels. Violet from Palatine says, we get Lexile requests frequently, but I would wonder about how complete and consistent this could be if we try to add them. Melissa Morgan at Winnetka Northfield says, I'm not a big fan of Fontes and Pinnell, but more patrons have requested items from that chart than before, so much so that they're confused about our spine labels. Why is your entire collection at a J level? Oh, it's frustrating. Anne from Huntley says, I like the idea of record sets for these, although I strongly dislike limiting kids to reading at their prescribed level. Kelly says, is it weird that this conversation is happening as my second grader is doing leveled reading 6 feet from me now? Oh, Violet from Palatine says, I agree. The one thing I loved about Common Core was the emphasis on kids reading materials at all levels, and then we have 2 agreements to that from Becky and Lisa. I think 2 things, I guess, in regards to this is if you are creating record sets that you feel are very worthwhile and want to share with the group, we do have like the CCS newsletter that goes out every Friday. So if you've created like a Fontes and Pinnell record set that's particularly notable, share it with us and we'll share it with all of CCS so other people can want to like see the work you're doing. Or if they want to add that same record set as a dashboard on their pack, or they want to do something with it, like let's cross-pollinate that information. And then if this is something you're getting asked for and you want to make it really apparent and easy to find, again, we can put that record set in your library pack in a couple of ways. Like one is a dashboard on the left-hand side. And then don't forget there's also the idea of like trigger words that in your catalog that when entered bring up certain lists. So if you wanted it set up so that when people put in like Fontes and Pinnell or accelerated reading, like that pointed to certain lists, that's something that we can do for you. And you could put in a ticket to help make that happen. So just keep that in mind. All right, was there any other Fontes and Pinnell accelerated reader anger or happiness to add to said conversation? Okay, I think we can wrap this one up then. I'm going to go ahead and close the reading level correlation chart. And then if anybody wanted this chart, the link to it is in the chat, but we can include it in the minutes too, because this looks really helpful. Okay, so Becky, whenever you're ready, I'm going to mute myself. Feel free to move us along.
So our next topic is pandemic modifications. So how's everybody modifying their services in response to the current situation?
This is Melissa from Winnetka Northfield, and I submitted the question. But basically, looking at the percentage of holds versus hold generated checkouts versus browsing checkouts. There's this huge discrepancy with youth services. Over 80% is browsing checkouts, and less than 20%, maybe 17 or 18% is holds related checkouts. So I was wondering how we could bring that browsing experience to patrons when they're not able to come into the building. And, you know, using a GoPro or QR codes or pictures of stuff on our new shelves that could then generate holds, just ways to increase browsing related activities from afar.
I can add, this is Meg from Prospect Heights. I can add that one thing that I'm in adult services, so a little bit different than youth, but we too were having this issue. I manage our hot picks collection there, and that is like almost entirely browsing in terms of what goes out on that. And so one of the things that we decided to do was to create little pamphlets that just have kind of up and coming titles or new releases on them. And then we are doing curbside currently because our building is closed to the public. We have circulation include one of those pamphlets with their checkout. So like if it looks like they were checking out fiction or nonfiction, we just stick one of those in their stack of books that we then put in their trunk for them. We've only kind of started doing that in the last couple of months. I'm not sure if it's increased circulation stats, but that was the solution. That was one of the solutions our library came up with.
There's a couple comments. Liz from Glencoe says, we're still creating display lists and publishing them. We also put out monthly newsletters highlighting new items. Lisa from Wilmette says, at Wilmette we are piloting a themed bundles program starting with winter and winter holidays. These are items patrons would usually be browsing on displays right now. So far we have a good response. Families calling and emailing to request. If it goes well, we will expand. Anne from Huntley says, I am in youth services. We have new grab-and-go shelves for picture books and juvenile fiction, as well as holiday DVDs pulled out. We have added a personalized book selection service for kids in an online form. It's a service we miss providing to folks in person. We've only had one family using it so far, but they love it. And then Kelly from Northbrook linked, let's see what she linked. And then Kelly from Northbrook just.
Sorry, yeah, it's basically both, like people fill out a form and say what they're interested in, and then we choose 5 books and put them in the bag. So it was kind of an answer to folks who don't have specific titles that they want, which happens a lot in youth services, but they want to make sure that they have books at home for their kids. So they can say, like, my daughter who is 4 and she likes unicorns, and then we'll pick 5 picture books that kind of fill that like. And we also have 5 fresh reads, which I'll put the link in the chat, and that one you sign up and you get a newsletter recommending books, and those are all things that you can check out as ebooks, which we decided to do just during the pandemic. And we do an early learning craft where people can take and make, and for that we're putting in a book list of things that you can check out as ebooks. This is Miles.
A couple more comments. Carlin from Grays Lake says, at Grays Lake we have curbside. We're currently close to the public. We converted hot picks to circulating temporarily. We're working on binge box / movie bundles. We also have an RA form, Reader's Advisory form for all ages. Curbside printing is available too, and we have Chromebooks and hotspots to circulate. A lot of the folks doing binge boxes too have turned those into, they've put them up on their dashboard on the left sidebar so people can view them from that space as well, or turn them into rotating carousels in their pack. Janice says we have an online forum. Our forums are for all ages. Lori from Park Ridge says that they have book lists online. They have a kids page. Let's open that and look at it. Adult has a virtual display and staff pics. And then these are some more examples of their virtual displays. So that looks awesome. Okay. All right, let's see a couple more. Carlin says, we are monitoring phones during most hours, but not 100% of most hours, mostly remotely. Anne from Huntley says, very similar to our service. Ariane says, adult, teen, and youth have what's next, a form like Northbrook's. Just open that and look at it. And then Kelly from Northbrook shared the forms for the personalized recommendations. And then Liz says, we are starting binge boxes as well. Children's has themed bundles. Tara from Lake Villa says, we have an online form, virtual displays on social media, live reference /RA, and remote printing. And I will say those binge boxes are amazing. I checked them out from Displays, and like my family has absolutely loved them, so very cool. All right, are there any other comments we want to throw in here or verbal commentary that anyone wants to make?
Chime in and say that if any of your libraries aren't already featuring online links to these recommendation forms, I'd maybe consider opening a help ticket with CCS. Kathleen is awesome at helping libraries customize their catalog and finding great ways to feature some of these resources that you are all creating. So if you're not already highlighting some of these, again, these forms or suggestions for your patrons, email us at help@ccslive.org and we can help like find ways to highlight these resources for your patrons.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Deborah. If you're just thinking, how do I promote this, and you just need ideas, but you're not super sure what to ask for, feel free to just powwow with us, and we're happy to throw some solutions your way, and we can try different things. And we've experimented with some libraries using bit.ly links, too, so that when you're accessing these collections through the catalog, we can get you a count, at least, of like how many click-throughs are basically moving towards those items, because we know that record sets and these links take a lot of time to create. And you want to make sure like you're getting a return on investment in the time you spend to create this online content, so we can work with you to establish that too. Okay, another question is, anyone providing free printing? Lake Villa says 20 pages per day. Kelly from Northbrook says we are allowing print pickup. Sean at Fox River Valley, 20 pages. Melissa at Morton Grove, 20 pages. Seems to be the magic number. Christina at Displays says free printing for 10 pages. And Liz at Glencoe says not officially, but we're not charging. Again, it looks like that 10 pages. Okay. I think there was a second part to this question. I don't know, Becky, if you wanted to share that.
Have it in my notes. Okay. So it just was, so we talked about the previous circulation changes, and then the other question was how are libraries modifying services?
Okay, so similar. Sorry, I just didn't realize.
I have a related question. It's Melissa from Winnetka Northfield again. How successful has chat service been for those libraries using it, as opposed to relying on either email or phone calls?
I can speak to this for McHenry. With curbside pickup, our phones have been so busy that sometimes patrons are having trouble getting through. So our chat numbers are growing steadily, and we hit our all-time spike the day that we went, our latest reduction in services was through the roof. So we didn't have chat until March, but I have to say it's been discovered and used quite a bit. So we're happy that we have that as an option.
Violet from Palatine says, our chat is super popular and it's a great way to take care of quick questions. And Tara from Lake Villa says, chat is used by patrons and usually comes in spurts, sometimes 3 per day and sometimes 10 or more. David from Prospect Heights says, our chat gets used regularly and helps reduce phone calls. And Janice says, I'm in kids and chat has never been very popular, or very big. Excuse me. Ariane says, chat is sometimes popular and sometimes quiet. We do send the Zoom links to programs so patrons can get in quickly if they can't find the email. Oh, just like I did before this meeting. It seems like those Zoom things always get lost. Catherine at Highland Park says, we introduced chat this year too. It has risen and fallen in popularity. Right now, both chat and phone calls are way down. When you say it rises and falls, do you mean it was like popular right when you introduced it and then got unpopular after some time had passed? Jillian says, chat is especially helpful if we go off-site again and you can keep the lines of communication open with patrons from home. And Ariane says, we're starting to get harassment chats though, and that is no fun. Thanks. Catherine says, it took a while for people to discover chat. It probably peaked when our building was open to patrons again for a time. Okay. All right, so a couple seconds of silence. I think we can probably close that topic and move on to open discussion if there's anything else anyone wanted to add or ask. Okay, not seeing any chat, so I'm going to hand it over to Becky to close the meeting when you're ready.
All right, yep. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Again, your name and your library is helpful. I mean, we can just keep hanging out if you guys want.
I move to adjourn Glencoe. I'm from Glencoe. Liz from Glencoe.
Thanks, Liz.
I'll second. Kelly Durham from Northbrook.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, so our next meeting is not until March 18th. Hopefully things will be different by then, maybe. Maybe we'll even be in person. So have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you.